For 3 days, the EU seemed more fractured than ever. But after 4 days of negotiations, a breakthrough was achieved on how to deal with a once-in-a-generation crisis. And leaders did it in a way that binds the bloc's members closer together.
The conclusions of this summit are truly historic. We have set up a capacity to borrow collectively and to put in place a collective recovery plan for the first time.
This was not easy. The fact that it took us so many days also shows that we came from different directions. But what counts for me is that we finally pulled ourselves together and that we are all convinced that we will make something out of what we decided to do.
EU leaders have approved a more than $2 trillion stimulus package for the next 7 years to counter the effects of COVID-19 lockdowns. That includes a recovery fund worth nearly $860 billion, which EU nations will raise together from capital markets. A little more than half that money will be made available in the form of grants that members will not have to pay back. Germany and France had proposed a more generous $570 billion in handouts, but the amount was haggled down by the Netherlands, Austria, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, a group German Chancellor Angela Merkel described as the frugals.
Agreements have been made that will make it possible for countries to keep a finger on the pulse of the progress of the reforms. It is about a lot of money, and it is good that these arrangements have been made.
The coronavirus pandemic has killed more than 135,000 EU citizens. And this year, the bloc's economy is expected to shrink 8.3%, the worst on record. EU members are united in the hope that their rescue package, even if watered down by penny pinchers, is enough to keep the crisis from getting worse. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
Well, for more on this historic deal, let's go to Philipp Heimberger. He's an economist at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. Welcome to Money Talks, Philipp. Now, as we heard in Paolo's package there, this is an unprecedented deal worth around $860 billion. Just over half of that will be given out as grants or loans to those countries hardest hit by the pandemic, with the rest issued as loans. Do you believe this is a good deal to help tackle the economic crisis that's currently gripping the EU?
Well, I think that the European Council deal is basically a mixed bag. I mean, a couple of months ago, it would have seemed politically outlandish that the EU actually borrows that much money on financial markets and then promotes additional temporary EU spending programs to tackle a crisis of this proportion. And I think the recovery instrument will somehow also promote recovery in the countries hardest hit by the pandemic. But the deal also comes at a heavy price. The EU budget rebate system is being reinforced. And we also see that the governance system put in place in terms of conditionality for payments is quite restrictive and could cause problems in the future. And so overall, I would say it's a mixed bag, and there's also a price that is paid for this fiscal stimulus of about 3% of EU GDP.
Yes, you mentioned the rebates system there. We understand that they were issued to the so-called frugal nations, I guess, as a sweetener in order to win back support. These are rebates are the money that are given back to member states for paying their dues to the European Union. But I'm wondering, are the concerns of the frugal nations justified? Countries like the Netherlands, Austria, Sweden and Denmark were worried that this recovery plan would just burden them with debt at the expense of giving the money out to other countries. Do you share those concerns?
Well, I think basically the problem is that the so-called frugals only think about how much they have to pay, and they do not think about what they actually get back. I think they have very much of a self-interest in a strong recovery across the whole EU, especially countries such as the Netherlands and Austria are highly dependent on intra-EU exports. For example, for Austria, Italy is the second most important EU export partner. And so they would also benefit a lot if the EU Recovery Fund kind of promotes recovery in southern European countries and allows for bringing down unemployment there, because the real danger is not that we will spend too much at the moment. The real problem could be that we spend too little, and that I think is something the frugals have not really grappled.
Now, we talk about the Marathon 5-day summit in order to reach this deal, but realistically, this idea has been in the works for months now, pretty much from the beginning of the pandemic in late February and March. But now this plan will need to be approved by the European Parliament, as well as the parliaments of all of the 27 EU member nations. Do you think this process is too slow? And when might we expect this money actually be distributed to countries that need it now?
Well, a slowdown of the whole process would certainly be a problem, but I think it's still important that the European Commission really puts scrutiny on this and then decides on whether it can go with it. But it's very important that the money kind of flows in the start of 2021, because I mean unemployment already skyrocketed in several EU countries, especially in the southern countries, and it's important to bring it down as soon as possible, because otherwise there will be permanent scars, and then it will be very difficult to deal with these problems. That's why it's important to kind of front load the payments, and that is one of the things that I think was improved in comparison to the Commission proposal, because there were some attempts to make sure that that large parts of the money from the EU Recovery Fund could be spent in 2021 and 2022 already.
Okay, Philipp Heimberger from the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. Thank you again for joining us on the program.